This is the Business Storytelling Show with Christoph Trapp. Name a top 20 storytelling podcast and a top 5% podcast globally. Christoph chats with thought leaders and experts to share tips and tricks that can help you tell your company's stories better to drive business results. Available wherever you listen to podcasts, live streamed on major social media channels, and part of the DB&A television network, available on most U.S. television sets and streaming on Roku and Amazon Fire. Here's Christoph with today's episode. Let's go.
Let's go, business storytellers. How's everyone doing? Did that really just say episode 580? Did I see that correctly? Holy buckets. We're moving right along. And once again, we are live on all these different channels, including on Amazon. And you know what? I want to show this to you just because I happen to have all this stuff by me. You can get this on Amazon. Alani drinks. They keep me awake during the day. And you know what? When you work at home, have you noticed that you end up with like 5 cups and 3 different cans of different things during the day? My other can, by the way, is I got that here too on Amazon. LaCroix. Yes, totally. We're turning this show into an infomercial, but I thought it would be interesting for you to see what I drink all day long to stay awake. Finally, the final thing I want to mention is Marketing a Good Career is now available and out for publication. So if you're thinking about becoming a marketer or moving into marketing or whatever it might be, take a look. This kind of walks you through all the different things you want to consider. But today we're talking about how are we going to be crisis ready. By the way, if you scan, amazing to me still how QR codes have come back and we're using them nonstop now. But crisis ready, it's I just finished that book. Melissa Agnes, founder of the Crisis Ready Institute, wrote that book. Very interesting topic to me, and there is a difference between being crisis ready and just having marketing emergencies, right? You know who I'm talking to right there. Some of you out there, everything is an emergency. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what's a crisis, how do we move through it, and how do we take the opportunity that comes out of it? So let's dive into that topic. Welcome to the show, Melissa.
Hello. I did that totally wrong.
If there's no right or wrong how you fist bump, it's just as long as you fist bump, that's how you do it. So thanks for joining me. I think I'm pretty sure I ran across you somewhere on Twitter and I saw something and I was like, let's get her on the show. And the noise in the background, well, that's the New York subway.
Sorry, guys.
Well, the only reason there's no subway here because I'm in Iowa and we barely have a bus system. Some city officials will certainly disagree with that statement, but that's my opinion. I'm sticking to it. So you founded the Crisis Ready Institute and wrote this book. And I mean, first of all, tell me about what does that even mean to be crisis ready? Why are you so interested in the topic? And let's start there.
That's a great place to start, especially if you never want me to stop talking, which I will do. What it means to be crisis ready. So I founded the Institute in 2018. Sorry for the noise, guys. I founded the Institute in 2018. I started in this career, in this profession in 2012, I want to say. So as a consultant until I founded the Institute. And essentially I was frustrated, continue to be frustrated with we don't learn this skill set, the mindset, the skill set, the capabilities of being crisis ready in school. So when you talked about a marketing emergency, for example, at the start when you're doing the intro, that's kind of like the best of what organizations can do today. So when you look at crisis ready, the difference is we take a cultural approach. So historically, crisis management, the industry that I'm in, was about having a plan, right? Just creating this like siloed, stagnant, linear document that got stored away and leadership could check off a box. And back in 2012, when everything, Twitter and social media and technology and cybersecurity and just all two-way communication and real-time expectations from stakeholders, when all of this started kind of rising to the surface and shaping the way that our society kind of lives and does business, both of those, that stagnant plan was no longer enough. I don't know that it was ever enough, but it certainly isn't enough anymore. So being crisis ready is a little bit different so that we take a cultural approach to crisis preparedness, or being skilled in responding to change, challenge, and crisis, both from an action standpoint, a communication standpoint, and a leadership standpoint. And we look at it as instead of it being a plan that sits on a shelf, a siloed plan, we help organizations and leaders develop programs that they then integrate into the very culture of their organization so that it's instinctive, it's reflexive. If something happens, you know precisely how to respond, action, communication in the right timeline in a way that actually strengthens your brand equity and strengthens trust with your stakeholders and your brand. Does that make sense?
You know what's interesting to me about that whole conversation? Another thing that people are not learning when they're in school, when they're in college, when they're wherever, and the list just keeps getting longer and longer every time. I mean, I don't. The list is just so long of things people aren't learning and they should be learning. And you know, when crisis happens, you have to respond. Certainly, you talk a lot about how are you ready for it before it happens. The one thing I really found very interesting in the book, you talk, and I remember this case actually, what the Ebola crisis did. And I don't remember the medical center in Atlanta, but I remember watching it on TV. And um, I think in your book, I mean, talk us through the whole thing, but in your book, basically, you talk about they thought they were ready, they were excited might be too strong of a word, but they were excited to help out, and then stuff happened and nobody saw it coming. Talk about that.
Nobody saw it coming. They got inundated and overwhelmed, and expectations were, set. I think this is also going back. So the book was published in 2018. So the story back then, still 5 years ago now, expectations, and even today, I'm a keynote speaker, and I was just on a pre-event call with a client this week, and she was saying how they had a crisis and they did everything right, but the expectations were so strong, so high, so that they could never meet them. And same thing happened with Emory University Hospital, I believe, yes, in Atlanta. When COVID, they got, no, not COVID, when Ebola hit, they got the first patient of Ebola in their hospital, and they were ready from a procedural standpoint. They weren't ready from the brand management and standpoint. And one of the major challenges when it comes to crisis management is the communication and leadership piece, because it has to do with the emotion. And so that's what happened, right? So when the first patient of Ebola that came to North America, came to the U.S., was sent to their hospital, Emory University Hospital was completely ready. They had the procedures, they had the talent, they had the skill, they had the protocols, they had the experience, the expertise, and yet they forgot the communication piece. They forgot to tell the community that, hey, we've got this. You can count on us. We're the leaders here. We've got this. We've got you. And so, of course, the community found out that Ebola was now in their community, and all of this is a huge the emotion of that, right? We don't want our families to die. We don't want to die. We don't want to catch Ebola, all of that. So they forgot to do the communication aspect, which is the area of crisis ready that personally I specialize in and love, because I love human nature. I love understanding emotion and communication and language, and how to resonate when, you can't bring logic to it, because you can't overcome emotion with logic. So that, I'll let you come back, Christoph, and continue the conversation, but that's what happened. They forgot to be ready for the emotions and how to communicate and lead through that, even though they were ready, they were prepared on their end from the actionable, management side of the crisis.
It's, it's so amazing to me that actually happens, and I know it happens more often than it doesn't, maybe. But we forget about that. We have to share stuff with the community, and it's in theory, it's so much easier today to do it. I mean, you could literally just hop on Twitter or whatever and just go live really quickly with your phone and say, here's what's new, here's what's up. Of course, the problem some companies will face is they have an ungodly 28-step approval process for anything that will ever see the light of day. So that probably doesn't help. But how do they make sure that they get that piece right? Because at the end of the day, right, whatever people perceive the truth to be, that is the truth in those people's minds.
Absolutely. So yes, legal and having too tight of reins on, and control is an illusion in life in general, period. So controlling a crisis is very much an illusion. What you want to strive to be able to do, to achieve, is to own your narrative. And so yes, legal can often be a hindrance. Having too tight kind of your hands on the reins and wanting to control the situation can very often often be a hindrance. But when it comes to, when you said you can just kind of pick up your phone and do some kind of a live or a chat or like just be personable, one of the biggest hindrances of being crisis ready or of leading through crisis is that doing that, communicating, it's easy. So, okay, let me back up. Successful crisis management requires the right actions to be taken to actually manage, fix, remedy the situation, while simultaneously the right communications are being communicated to the right stakeholders, to the right audiences, and all of this has to happen in the right timeline. So action communication in the right timeline simultaneously. The action piece is the easy piece, right? If we look at Emory University Hospital, we can say that they had the actions down. Their procedures, that's their job. They were able to care for the person who had Ebola and make sure that it wouldn't get out into the community. That's the actionable piece. The communication piece in crisis is the most vulnerable, scary, intimidating, uncomfortable piece of it. Because if you think about it, crisis comes with a lot of unknowns and a high emotion and high stakes. To stand up as a leader, to fill that space, to rise to that space as a leader and, be a fallible human who doesn't have all the answers, who might be panicked and overwhelmed him or herself, who has to then communicate with a panicked public or an enraged public or a devastated public. That's a really, 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 really hard thing to do for any person. And to our points earlier, we aren't taught this skill in school.
Yeah, it's the other thing I was just thinking as you were talking about how to be ready. I mean, we had what's called a derecho. I call it an inland hurricane here in town a couple of years ago, and basically 90% of the city's buildings were damaged, including our home. Not as bad as others, but certainly there was enough damage to have repairs. And nobody had thought about what would happen if the power goes out to the entire area. How are we going to communicate? Right? And that was, I mean, of course, that's public safety more than a company. But how do you even imagine, or maybe you don't have to, but give me your opinion on that. As a company, how many scenarios do you have to think about? How do you prepare ahead of time? And I know public safety officials, the good ones at least, do this all the time. They think about, what if this happens? What if that happens? How would we react? Now, the thing I mentioned earlier, you can just take out your phone and do and do a live stream. That works as long as there's internet. But when the power goes out, there's nothing, right? It's like welcome to the 1990s or earlier, maybe even. So how do you prepare? Do you have to role play? I guess. Do you have to think about different scenarios? How do companies do that to be ready?
Okay, so I'm going to try to break it down in bite-sizable chunks that are building blocks, and also they won't be all-encompassing because it's a little bit more. First is to understand that you are and accept that you are susceptible to risk. We are susceptible to risk as human beings. Oops, sorry guys, as human beings as well as organizations. So understand that, and then look at your point. Try to identify your high-risk scenarios. So what we call in Crisis Ready, we call them your high-risk scenarios. So they're the most likely high-impact types of events that can occur, that can strike your organization, whether it's due to external circumstances or due to internal circumstances and or both. So looking at your high-risk scenarios, if you look at your high-risk scenarios and you identify, this is an exercise that you can do with your teams and say, hey, cross-organizationally, what keeps you up at night? Because what keeps HR up at night is going to be different from what keeps IT up at night. Is going to be different from what keeps your business continuity team up at night with, finance, the leadership team. Like everybody has a different relationship with the brand. There are different roles and expertise, and they're different kind of viewpoints. So having that discussion and then breaking it down, you'll come up with, let's say, 5, 10, 12 at the most high-risk scenarios. You can then do a deep dive into each one of those scenarios to become crisis ready. So let's say that you've identified 5 high-risk scenarios that are the most likely high impact things. They are the things that are the most likely to happen, and if and when they happen, you're going to be in hot water. You're going to be in trouble. It's going to be a challenge to overcome. You're going to potentially lose market share. You're going to lose brand equity. You're going to lose whatever you might lose, right? So they're the important things. Going through the motions of becoming crisis ready the way that we've designed it, the framework for Crisis Ready is really, one, it's about creating a program that's integrated into the culture of the brand, right? It's not about just solely having a siloed plan, like stagnant document that sits on a shelf somewhere in a file somewhere. So you're going through the motions of that. You're creating the governance structure. You're looking at stakeholder mapping. You're understanding in scenario A, what do we need to do from an actionable standpoint, action communication timeline, actionable standpoint? What does every department need to do? What are the roles and responsibilities? What is our oversight going to look like from a governance standpoint? From a communication standpoint, if you do a stakeholder mapping exercise, what are each one of our stakeholders going to need, feel, and expect of the brand in the interest? The goal with Crisis Ready is always to come out of any type of negatively impactful situation with increased trust and credibility. So one of the Crisis Ready rules is people above process and bottom line always. And that's always, of course, in accordance with your core values. So if you take all of that together, you have a lot of questions that you can answer and that you can then, to your point, Christoph, of role playing, we call them simulations. Some people do tabletop exercises. I personally think that those are a lot less valuable. I like to conduct crisis simulations for half day with my clients where we actually inject them into a very controlled, safe crisis, but very realistic, very real. And it's not about testing the people, it's about testing the program, strengthening the program and the processes, and helping the team really strengthen their skill set so that it becomes instinctive. So if you do that, I'm going to summarize here. If you do that for each one of your, let's say, 5 high-risk scenarios, you will have a solid program. Now, what happens if a 6th scenario that completely blindsides you, that not in a million years could you have ever anticipated or guessed or even daydreamed that it would happen? You, by going so deep into becoming crisis ready and honing the mindset, skill set, and capabilities throughout your organization, it doesn't matter what 6th or 7th or 8th scenario comes into play, because the fundamentals, the principles for crisis management all remain the same. And by going through the motions those 5 times and strengthening your program and strengthening your skill set, your team is now essentially, that's why I called the book Building an Invincible Brand in an Uncertain World. Essentially, you have a very, very, very resilient, very savvy, very confident and competent team to rise to any occasion, to any challenging occasion.
It's interesting because we certainly want to be out there, but we also want to be invincible when it doesn't necessarily help us. So very interesting to think about it that way too. So let's talk about your opinion on spokespeople, or the people who are the face of the organization. And sometimes that's more than one person. And I got very strong opinions about this. My opinion is, and yes, I'm in PR and I'm in marketing, and I've been on the other side in journalism as well. So I got different perspectives on this, certainly. But if you are the spokesperson for your organization, you cannot get it wrong, period. If you don't know the answer, you need to say, I don't know the specific answer. Let me go check and I will get back to you. And then this should go unsaid. Common sense is not that common sometimes. Then you circle back with the people who asked the question. But you cannot guess. Period. The end. And I will die on that hill. So, but to be a good spokesperson, you have to have good relationships, right? People have to trust you, because if they don't tell you anything, of course you don't know what to say, or if you're not good at your job, you're going to make it up, or you whatever. But in my opinion, you can. What's your opinion on having good spokespeople and making sure they're prepared? And do you disagree or agree with what I just said?
No, I agree with what you just said, and I'll say it's not just the spokespeople who have to have solid relationships, right? When I talk about a stakeholder mapping exercise, you're looking at all stakeholders. Spokespeople tend to talk to the media, and the media is, yes, relationship, right? You need to have a relationship with media that pertains to your industry, to your brand, to your region, so that you actually can have a say, right? But they'll give you the benefit you've earned the benefit of the doubt. They'll come to you, they'll want to hear from you, and you'll have an opportunity to own that piece of your narrative. But essentially, when it comes down to it, the media are a means to an end. The media is like social media, is like publishing on your website, is like picking up the phone and talking directly. They are a means to speak to the core people who actually matter to the brand, to the business. And it's not just the spokespersons. The spokesperson is, front and center with the limelight on them. if there's a press conference or a town hall or something like that, or if they go on to, do a live stream. But you really need to have solid relationships with every single stakeholder, and that runs across the organization. So, and that's part of that crisis ready culture and that crisis ready mindset of, is your sales team, your customer service, your different departments that speak to your vendors, like all of those relationships. Successful business is built on relationships, and it's a component of all of those relationships. Crisis management is about doing right by the people you serve. It's about when it matters most. It's about doing right by those relationships and putting those relationships first and foremost. So yes, I agree with you, absolutely. How do you train your spokespeople? One, it shouldn't just be your spokespeople, because to the point on social media, anybody and everybody within the organization can be asked a question. And if they don't understand how and why they need to respond in a certain way, how to respond in that certain way, then even with the best of intentions, they can get it wrong, and that can be the downfall of the brand. So it's not just spokespeople who need to be trained, and yes, spokespeople absolutely need to be trained. And then one last thing on spokespeople is that it's not necessarily who you might think. It doesn't necessarily need to be the president or the CEO of the organization. It needs to be somebody, depending on the type of situation. Maybe it's somebody within your comms department, sure. But if it's a serious crisis and you really need to lead through it, then you need somebody on the C-suite. You need somebody who's a solid, authoritative representative of the organization and can answer, questions and share things. But that person needs to have specific qualities. So, for example, personability. If the president, and everybody has different skill sets and talents and natural aptitudes. So if the president or CEO of your organization is not the most personable human being, you're not going to want them to get on stage and speak to an emotional crowd when they're already in an emotional state, like it or not, right? Because they're still managing the crisis. So you need to train your spokespeople. You need to train everybody to be spokespeople for your organization. And when it comes to choosing your primary spokespeople, you've got to do that. You have to be very careful with how you do that. You need to be very thoughtful and mindful of how you do that.
I also do agree that it doesn't have to be the president or the CEO necessarily, but that also on the flip side, I was reminded as you were talking, the sheriff here in my local Lynn County, 2 sheriffs ago, I think, he's now retired, but he is and sheriff is an elected position, right? And so he would come out to everything. Like if the media had a question, he was on his way. Hair was perfect, mustache was perfect, everything was perfect. And he was the spokesperson. And it was actually a fantastic strategy, right? I mean, kind of on his time. I mean, you always had to be kind of ready because you can't control when stuff happens. But he was always in the media. He was always out there. People would be like, yes, oh, he is taking care of things. He has a handle on things. So certainly that works. The other thing I wanted to mention when you talk about, and maybe for 30 seconds, you can tell us any tips you might have on this one. Having a relationship with media is harder and harder. I mean, media people come and go quicker than ever. And how do you do that? How do you have a relationship with the media specifically? I mean, specific people, I guess.
So I am not a PR person. That is not, I think that there are a ton of PR pros out there who can answer that question way better than I do, or can, or will. But it's one and the same, right? So it's relationships. How do you meet new people, and how do you form bonds and kind of deep ties, relationships, emotionally connected being, a very key term. Relationships with them. And then when they change, relationships matter. And from my perspective, relationships matter deeply. So even if somebody changes their role, they're still going to be in some realm likely as part of, the media, and part of a reporter, or part of some kind of within that industry. So keep that tie. And if you have a close tie with them, ask for an intro for the person who's coming in. And again, and then just repeat the cycle. I think what it comes down to, and I know I'm over 30 seconds, but what it comes down to is really caring about the relationship and that human connection, that emotional connection. And that's not just for the media, that's just for any relationship, business and professional.
Yeah, certainly there's always people that you can connect with and help you meet other people in the industry. CrisisReadyInstitute.com is the website. You can check it out. In the last 30 seconds, Melissa, tell us who would reach out to the Crisis Ready Institute? Who do you work with? That sort of thing. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Honestly, if this is interesting to you, reach out, because we have a team of people who, no matter what your area of expertise, will cater to you and will bring you in. If you are a comms professional of any shape or form, CrisisReadyCourse.com if any of this is interesting to you, because we've got a 10-week, 15-hour course that is phenomenal that you can't find anywhere else in the world.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review our show on your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to share this episode with your networks. We appreciate you. Until next time, let's